child's just been diagnosed with an extremely rare brain cancer, there are only a few doctors in the world that understand the disease, let alone how to operate on it. And you've devoted everything to finding and getting the attention of that one doctor. And the doctor says to you, okay, we need your child at such and such a hospital in a week for the operation, or your child will die. Do you argue? Do you ask if you can have 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Why exactly a week, doctor? Why isn't it 6 days? Why isn't it 7 days? Why isn't it 8 days? You don't have those conversations, do you? It's your child. You've gotten the world's greatest expert, and you rightly determine it's time for you to implement, not ask more questions. Well, our next 200 billion children are facing ecocide, certain ecocide. There are more than a few. There are close to 3,500 doctors of climate science. But the Einstein of those, the acknowledged world leader, is James Hansen. And if you were to study his writings, which are available at his Columbia University website, you might have to study a long time, as I have, to get to the bottom line. It's taken me a long, long time. But if you did the same as I, with the same mindset, these are your children, the next 200 billion, this is clearly the world-leading authority with whom 98% of the other 3,500 doctors agree. This is what he has to say. Indisputably, we are currently burning about 9 gigatons, 9 billion tons of fossil fuels every year. Primarily coal, followed by oil and rapidly rising natural gas. And our woods, our forests, account for about 20% of the emissions. And if you add up all that fuel that's being burned and turned into emissions, it's about 9 billion tons per year. Now, our history as a planet over recent years is that we are increasing the amount of fossil fuels we're burning about 3% per year. So in 2012, 9 gigatons. In 2013, a little more than 18 gigatons for that 3% increase, and on and on and on and on. So the cumulative burning of fossil fuels by 2050 is headed toward over 600 gigatons additional put in the atmosphere starting today. Well, the diagnosis from Dr. Hansen that 3,500 of his peers agree with is that on top of the hundreds and hundreds of gigatons of greenhouse gases that we've already put in the atmosphere, and they stay there up to 1,000 years. If we put more than 128 gigatons into the atmosphere, it will have such a warming effect that it will be practically, virtually impossible to ever reverse the effects, and to reverse them before they irrevocably trigger climate feedbacks total annihilation of the reflective polar ice cap, the unstoppable melting of Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheet, and its sea level rises, the killer weather that will replace the benign weather of the last 10,000 years. That on top of the hundreds and hundreds of gigatons that we've burned in the last 100 years, largely in the last 30 years, we have 128 gigatons we can yet burn. Now, Plan A, world economies as usual, world governmental plans as usual. We're on a 3% per year increase. And we will have burned that maximum total allowance of 128 gigatons by the year 2023. 11 years from now. Oh gosh, there are a whole bunch of crazies. Well, gee, maybe we can figure something out then. Gee, maybe if I don't get that operation for my child a week from now, like the doctor said, maybe my child will live. That's not who I am, and if that's who you are, then you might want to listen a little bit longer. This array of green bars is adhering to what Dr. Hansen says we need to do, which is to reduce our rate of burning fossil fuels 6% per year. So instead of 9 gigatons in 2013, we need to burn only 94% of 9 gigatons, a little bit less than 9 gigatons, and 94% of that figure the following year. If we do so, then rather than hitting the maximum future allowance of more fossil fuels burned of 128 gigatons in 2023, we stretch that deadline all the way out to 2050. What is required, or one of the ways and the most likely way of achieving that, is to end the use of our coal-fired power plants. First in the United States, for reasons that won't be discussed here, other than we're the largest offender in terms of emissions, and we're the most likely to start the process, and we're the most likely to influence the rest of the world to follow us. If we were to close our 600 coal-fired power plants in the next 10 years, as we are morally bound to do to our children and to the rest of the world, then this 6% per year reduction of global emissions would pretty well have been achieved. Dr. Hansen and those working with him have projected that if we do that part, then China and India are going to follow with some heavy-handed encouragement from us, trade sanctions, whatever, but they'll follow because they're more in the crosshairs of environmental ecocide than we are. So the continuation away from business as usual, the continued decrease at 6% per year, is largely through the phase out of coal-fired power plants in the rest of the world by roughly the 2032 time frame. The driving mechanism to achieve this is secondarily regulation. It's primarily doing what we've already done with restaurants, hospitals, nuclear plants. We've told them, you have waste from your operations, as in waste that needs to be disposed of. In the case of hospitals, toxic waste, nuclear power plants, nuclear waste. You can't dump that in my yard. You can't dump that in my ocean. You can't dump that in my parks. I'm not going to tell you have to cease your operations, but you have to pay the costs of dealing with your waste. So the sane driving mechanism, and the only mechanism available for driving us from this 3% per year increase to 6% per year decrease, is saying the same thing to the fossil fuel industry. You can do your tar sands, you can do your burning of coal, you can do your selling of gasoline, you can do your fracking, but you can't do it. You can't do the dumping of global warming gases for free. Not anymore. And over the next 10 years, we will increase to $240 per ton that you will pay into a kitty here in the United States, and then the rest of the world will follow suit in their own countries. And those funds will be distributed 100% to every taxpayer, every registered citizen in this country. By $240 a ton, it will come to over $1 trillion a year in monies, and in a family of four, about $20,000 a year, $18,000 to $20,000 a year in monies that will be distributed to them to do with what they want. So the hue and cry that to achieve a curve like this, to move from increasing our use of fossil fuels to a 6% per year decreasing, will crash the economy? I don't think so. Plug-in hybrids have no emissions. This $240 a ton will be passed on by the fossil fuel companies to their consumers. So the price of gas by the time it's $240 a ton will be increased by $2 a gallon. And a family of four is collecting $20,000 a year. I think they can afford that plug-in hybrid running off of wind power at $1 a gallon with that $20,000 a year that they're getting. They can afford to demand wind power for their electricity rather than coal. So there's not an economic problem here unless you're in the coal, fracking, or gasoline business. So this is not only doable, it's insane from an economic standpoint not to do it. It will save consumers huge amounts of money. They won't be paying $4, $5, $6, $7 a gallon for gasoline. They'll be driving on $1 a gallon wind power. They won't be paying more for electricity. They're paying 8 cents a kilowatt hours now. Wind is already there. Solar voltaics are rapidly moving to that same inexpensive level. We don't have a technology problem. We don't have a price problem. We don't have an energy problem. We don't have an economic problem. We have a problem that we don't have parents that love our children and grandchildren enough so far to do whatever it takes to get this sane policy implemented. This is the bottom line, folks. This is the bottom line. This is the equivalent of your child is going to die unless that child gets an operation in a week. Ecocide is a certainty unless we immediately begin to reduce our emissions of our burning of coal and oil, our forests, and our natural gas at a rate of 6% per year, which is entirely manageable starting in 2012. If we don't, and if we wait, the deal is really sealed within the next couple of years, but we pass the ecocide threshold of an additional 128 gigatons of fossil fuels burned by 2023. If, as appears entirely unlikely, people stand up at a fraction of the risk of 100,000 people in Tahrir Square in Egypt 2 years ago, or the women's suffragists, or the civil rights workers, a fraction of the risk, and drive through this sane, utterly moral policy, then we don't hit that threshold until 2050, giving us all that time to more and more implement the future technology, which is not fossil fuel, but which is green technology, and first of all, efficiency. In this, roughly this time frame, although it can happen anywhere in here, we begin the process of naturally drawing down from the 425 parts per million of global warming gases by the planting of billions of trees around the world and through soil management. And shockingly, our soil sequesters, captures huge amounts of carbon that otherwise would drive this figure further up. Well, we can use that to our advantage by planting billions of more trees and better managing our soils. We can draw down not only to this current level of 393 parts per million, we can draw it down to where we stop the warming, which is at 350 parts per million. So we can drag that by 2099. We can drag it way below where we are right now. And we have to stop the warming process. The warming process won't stop until we get back down to 350 parts per million. That's the whole deal, friends. Right here. Here's business as usual. 425 parts per million, which is exactly what you get if you build, as soon as you have burned 128 gigatons more of fossil fuels, you will get to 425 parts per million. We can hit that, we will hit that in 2023. Or we can drag it out to 2025 and then begin bending the curve down. But we don't get to begin bending the curve down here. You think we're going to turn off all the coal-fired power plants in 2023? No. So now we're faced with a scenario like this, and the calculations, because of feedbacks and elsewhere, we'll never get it back down to 350 parts per million. We'll never get it down to where warming stops. And ecocide is a certainty. That's it.